Hello everyone. Today we are going to study supply, the law of supply and the supply relationship. This is the study plan, what exactly we are supposed to cover, what exactly supply is, how supply curve looks like, why it is upward sloping. We will also cover determinants of supply, which are going to shift our supply curve to the left and to the right. And also we'll cover the difference between movement along supply curve and the shift in the supply curve. These are complete basics which you need to be very comfortable with to ensure that you are able to use demand and supply model effectively. So please make sure that you understand every single aspect from today's lecture. So let's proceed. Supply is simply a relationship between the price and quantity of output which producers are willing to sell at each and every price. When price goes up, it means that quantity supplied will increase because producers will be more willing, more happy to supply more at this higher price. The higher prices imply that producers will be able to earn higher profit. So they will have an incentive to increase production. Apart from this, there might be more firms coming to the market, joining the market because it's profitable, and as a result, quantity provided will increase. So the higher the price, the more producers are willing to sell at this price. And the other way around, when price drops, some producers will go out of business altogether because it's not profitable for them to work at this low price anymore. Some will have to cut down production and switch resources to more profitable activities. So as a result, when price is lower, quantity supplied will decrease, holding other things equal. This implies that the supply curve is upward sloping. Supply curve S, shown as S or labeled as S, that's a convention in economics. It shows how many units will be offered to the market at each and every price. As before in our demand-supply model, we plot prices, all monetary variables along vertical axis, quantities along horizontal axis, and upward sloping supply curve reflects the supply relationship. The higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied will be. So as price goes up from P1 to P2, we move from point A to point B along the same supply curve, which implies that quantity provided, quantity supplied will increase from Q1 to Q3. The higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied will be. Other things being equal, of course, holding other things equal. Next, we'll need to distinguish between supply and quantity supplied. The relationship will be absolutely the same as for demand, but we'll just apply this to manufacturers. So quantity supplied, our first paragraph here, shows how many units producer is willing to sell at each individual price. So for example, when price of apples is £2 per kilo, producers will be willing to sell, let's say, 1,000 units per hour, something like this. So this is quantity supplied. It shows how many units will be sold at each price. While supply shows the whole relationship between all possible prices and all possible quantities. So basically supply will show how quantity supplied will vary if price of apples will change from 10p to £10. It will show all possible quantities sold at each and every price. What does this mean? This will have implications to our graphical analysis. When we experience change in the price of our good, this will imply that quantity supplied will change and we will move along the same supply curve. Higher price, higher quantity, lower price, lower quantity. There will be a movement along the same upward sloping supply curve. While if there will be a change in any other factor, any other determinant of supply apart from price for our product, this will change the whole supply relationship and it will cause a shift in the supply curve. We'll have a new supply curve which will show new relationship between prices and quantities. Increase in supply will imply that supply curve will shift to the right, and decrease in supply will imply leftward shift in the supply curve. So graphically it will look like this. If originally we are located on the blue supply curve S0, higher supply, higher quantities sold at each and every price imply that supply curve shifts to the right, and we will now be located on this red line. So regardless of the price, higher supply implies that there will be higher quantities, so we'll move to the right along our horizontal axis towards higher quantities. And lower supply implies that supply curve moves from this blue line to green line. There will be lower quantities for each and every price. Each point on the supply curve will shift to the left towards lower quantities, towards zero. Higher supply shift to the right, lower supply shift to the left. Determinants of supply. This is the most important slide from today's lecture. If you're making any notes, please make sure that you put an exclamation mark next to this slide. This slide shows all factors which will shift supply curve to the left or to the right. The quantity which producers are willing to sell depends not only on the price, but also on production costs, which include all costs associated with supplying their product to the market: labor costs, interest charges, cost of raw materials, etc. It depends on technological progress, government policy, taxes, subsidies, and so on, profitability of alternative products or substitutes and supply, and products in joint supply as well, producer expectations of future events, legislation, and so-called supply shocks, some other random events which can distort supply. So what is important here? The important thing to understand is that any factor which will increase cost of production will reduce supply. This is what I've written down at the bottom of the slide. Any factor which will make our production more expensive will reduce supply, and any factor which will reduce cost of production will increase supply. Majority of these factors can in fact be converted into the effect on the cost of production. For example, technological progress can change the cost of production. When we are enjoying technological progress, it implies that we can produce our products cheaper. It will affect cost of production. We can make more items quicker, cheaper, more effectively, and as a result, this technological progress and lower costs of production will increase supply. Or additional taxes, form of government policy, will imply that it's more expensive for us to provide our product to the market. It will increase cost of production, and as a result, it will reduce supply, and so on. So whenever you analyze effect on supply, try to think how this particular factor will change the cost of production and shift your supply curve accordingly. Let's have a look at some examples. Let's have a look at the effect of changing costs on supply. The original supply curve was drawn on the assumption that the cost of production remain constant. That's why I've mentioned that other things being equal. So initially we assume that costs are equal to some amount, and our supply curve is shown by this purple line S. Now let's imagine that production costs go up. For example, government introduces a new minimum wage law. So now companies are forced to pay higher wages to their staff members. So labor costs go up, wage bill goes up, cost of production go up. So when costs of production increase, it implies that companies will be unable to sell the same amount of output as before at the previous price. They cannot simply keep selling the same quantity Q0 at the original price. They will need to pass these additional costs on to consumers. Consumers will need to pay higher prices. So as a result, point A will shift upwards. It will shift towards some new point on the green supply curve. Let's call it A prime. So new price will reflect higher costs of production, and this will be the case regardless of where we've been located. If we've been located at some point B, for example, on the supply curve, it means that higher costs of production will take us to the new point B prime on the green supply curve, and so on. However, if the company is unable to charge higher prices, maybe because they will lose their market share or consumers are not prepared to pay these higher prices, they will be forced to cut down production because it's not profitable for them to keep selling the same amount. They will need to switch producing some other more profitable product with higher profit margin, and as a result, they will be unable to keep selling the same quantity as before. They were located at point A, selling Q0. If they cannot charge higher price, they will need to cut down production, and as a result, will move to some point A double prime. So instead of increasing the price, they will cut down production. So they will now sell lower quantities. Let's call it QA. for example, QA double prime. This is how much we'll be selling at the existing price with higher costs. Regardless of what strategy the firm will choose to increase prices to pass this extra cost on to consumers, or cut down production, or maybe some combination of this, every point on the supply curve will shift upwards and to the left. In other words, our purple supply curve will shift towards this new green line. So rise in the cost of production will lead to decrease in supply and will shift supply curve upwards and to the left. So we'll have this shift from purple line to green line. And vice versa, when costs drop, when costs go down, we will be able to charge lower prices for previous quantities. So instead of charging the original price P0, we'll be able to charge lower prices. This will be true for every single point on the supply curve, which means that our purple line will shift lower, or will simply expand production because it's more profitable for us. Our costs are lower. We can keep prices the same and expand production and earn higher profit. In any case, supply curve will shift downwards and to the right. This is the most important thing to understand, the effect of changing costs on the supply. Next, effect of technology on supply. As I mentioned previously, you can try to translate or convert any factor which is affecting your supply onto effect on costs. So generally, if technology improves, it implies that costs of production are likely to fall. We will be able to produce the same amount of items quicker or cheaper or better or with less resources, with less staff or maybe smaller amount of raw materials. And this productive efficiency will reduce the cost of production. This will encourage firms to produce more for each and every level or charge lower prices, so they will be able to pass this additional cost savings on to consumers. And as a result, technological improvements will cause the same effect on the supply as lower costs. They will shift supply curve downwards and to the right. And the other way around, technological regress, which is the opposite to progress, implies that our technology deteriorates. We are able to produce less with more resources, not as effectively as before, which is equivalent to raising costs of production. This will reduce supply and will shift supply curve upwards or to the left. In majority of normal situations, we don't really experience technological regress in real life. However, we can be subject to this in case of various natural disasters, for example, tsunami or earthquake, which destroys the major manufacturing facility, and we'll have to start from scratch, or in case of wars, revolution, riots, and so on, when we lose our ability to produce products as effectively as previously. This will increase costs of production, will reduce supply and shift supply curve upwards and to the left. Effect of taxes and subsidies on supply. These are two major forms of government policy. Government can impose additional taxes on the producers, which will increase production costs. So generally, what will happen? If we were located along this supply curve originally, this was price, this was quantity, we were located at some point A. Higher taxes implies that on top of covering our production costs, will also need to pay taxes. For example, we'll need to pay, let's say, plus £5 to the government for each item which we produce. And this will be true for each and every quantity, for each and every price level. So every point on the supply curve will shift upwards by the amount of additional tax imposed, which means that our new supply curve will now be located high. It will reduce supply and shift supply curve upwards. Subsidies will cause the opposite effect. Subsidies imply that government pays you, the manufacturer, an additional sum on top of what customer pays you. For example, this is quite common in agricultural sector. If you are a farmer and you produce some food items, food products, government frequently subsidizes this sector. This is true for most European countries. So let's imagine that you are a supplier who sells milk, for example. This is price, this is quantity. Originally, you used to sell your milk at £1 per bottle, and you used to sell, let's say, 100 bottles, you used to produce 100 bottles or 100 liters of milk per day or per hour or per any period. You've been located at point A. Now, on top of getting £1 which your customer pays you, you will also receive, let's say, 50p from the government. Government will provide an additional incentive for you, which means that you will have an incentive to sell more items because you will be paid more. For each and every pound, you will receive 50p more. So basically, you have an incentive to move from point A to some point B, which implies that you are producing more items. For example, 120 liters. You earn higher prices, you earn higher revenue, higher profits, so you have higher incentive to produce more items. Or alternatively, you can actually cut down your prices by the amount of subsidy. You will be able to afford to start selling your milk at lower prices, at 50p, because customers will pay you this amount, 50p, and the rest will be covered by the government. So you will still receive the same amount, the same price, the same revenue, £1 per bottle, but because you are charging lower prices, you will be able to capture higher market share. So basically, regardless of this scenario, whatever you decide to do, to drop the prices or increase production or some combination, every point on the supply curve will shift to the right or downwards, which means that our new supply curve will now be located, will be represented by this new, let's call it thicker supply line. So it will shift downwards. Subsidies will increase supply. Finally, effect of prices of other goods. Changes in prices for some other goods can affect your supply as well. We've mentioned, when we looked at the slide with determinants of supply, we mentioned alternative items which can also be produced using the same resources. If a particular product is more profitable, you can decide to reduce production of your original item and switch to more profitable item. So substitutes in production can affect the supply of the original product. Or some other example which I've shown you here. Let's imagine that we used to produce some agricultural products and price of beef goes up. You don't produce beef, but it just happens that for whatever reasons price of beef goes up. Maybe there was some research published that beef is extremely good for your health and people start consuming more beef and price of this product goes up. This is likely to encourage suppliers to provide more beef to the market because it's more profitable. So quantity supplied of beef will go up, which means that as farmers start to grow more cows for beef, this will increase supply of leather and cow hides, which is a byproduct of beef production, which also means that they will need to increase the amount of cattle which is rearing on fields. And this implies that we will need to switch our field usage from, for example, growing wheat or other agricultural products to rearing cattle, to rearing cows, to growing cows. And as a result, as farmers switch their production towards more profitable activity, towards growing cows and producing beef, there might be a lower supply of wheat. So generally, supply of crops, various crops, is likely to be affected by changes in some other market because suppliers can switch to more profitable products, to some alternative products which generate higher profit margin. So summary, we need to distinguish differences in quantity supplied and supply itself. Changes in price for our particular product which we produce, which we sell to the market, apples or iPhones or beef or whatever, changes in the price for our product will change quantity supplied, and it will cause a movement along the same supply curve. Supply curve will remain unchanged, but will simply move upwards or down along the same supply curve. While if we experience a change in any other factor which will affect supply apart from the price, it will distort the whole supply relationship, it will change supply, the whole supply, not just quantity supplied, and will cause a shift in the supply curve. Supply curve can shift to the right, for example, which means that supply increases when cost of production drop, or when technology improves, or when subsidy is provided, or when expectations are optimistic, or alternative products are less profitable now. Let me just explain a little bit expectations element. We tend, both consumers and producers tend to be affected by expectations of future events. For example, let me just give you a current situation. If we expect to go into lockdown, this is likely to cause increasing demand for food items and hand sanitizers. If consumers expect that shops will be closed or it will be difficult for them to get to the shops to buy their necessities, they are likely to stock up on specific products, which means that demand for food items and hand sanitizers and masks are likely to increase, which means that suppliers expecting this additional demand can actually start producing more at each and every price. They can start expanding their production levels in order to satisfy this increased demand. Why is that? Because they can earn higher profit. They're in business to earn money, to earn profit, and when they're able to earn higher profit by expanding production, they have an incentive to do so. It is expectations of additional demand which causes changes in supply. Producers will have an incentive to expand capacity and sell more at each and every price because they're able to earn higher profit. And similarly, when expectations are negative, are pessimistic, when they expect some negative changes in the market, they can start cutting down their production straight away because they know that they're going to lose profit, so it makes sense for them to start reducing their production activities straight away. Expectations will affect both consumers and producers. And final slide for today will show you the difference between an individual supply curve and the market supply curve. As before, as with the demand, the idea is absolutely the same. An individual supply curve shows the supply for an individual seller, individual manufacturer. For example, we have two companies which are working in a particular market. For example, Robert and Gregory are selling books, for example. They have bookstores next to the university, for example, and this is where students used to buy their textbooks. So each of these particular sellers will have an individual supply curve. For example, Robert is prepared to sell 3 textbooks when the price is equal to £20, while Gregory is prepared to sell 4 textbooks at this price when price is 20. Market supply curve can be derived by adding up individual supply of each seller, of each company which operates in a particular market. In other words, we'll have a horizontal summing. Figures along vertical axis, prices, will remain the same, but figures along horizontal axis will be added up. So when price is 20, Robert, our first company, sells 3 books. Gregory, second company, sells 4 books. So in total, when price is 20, there will be 7 books sold in the market. Similarly, when price is equal to £5, Robert doesn't sell anything, Gregory doesn't sell anything. So our supply curve starts from 0. When price is 5, there will be 0 books available on the market. When price is, let's say, 10 pounds, Robert will sell his first textbook. Gregory will still not be offering anything at all. His quantity supplied will be equal to 0. So 1 item for Robert. Let me just mark this down. 1 for Robert, 0 for Gregory. 1 plus 0 will be equal to 1 item sold in total. So this is an individual supply curve. Individual. This is another individual supply curve, and this is the market supply curve for the whole market with our 2 companies. Our market supply curve is likely to be flatter because total quantities will be higher. So we spread out this curve across higher number of units along horizontal axis. So it will be more spread, it will be flatter. Question. This is type of question which you might be asked in your seminars, which will be similar to exam. Of course, in exam you will have a slightly more complicated question. So let's just revise this. Which way will the market supply of pizzas shift if the price of flour falls? Think about this, write down your answer, stop the video until you finish the question, and then continue. Ready? So have a look. We are talking here about market of pizzas, and there are changes in the price of flour. It's changing price, but it's a price of another product, not price of pizzas. Because it's a change in other determinant of supply apart from price of pizzas, there will be a shift in the supply curve. The question is where, to the left or to the right? So what will happen to supply of pizzas? When price of flour drops, it implies that cost of production for pizzas will now be lower. We are using flour to produce pizzas. Now this flour is cheaper, which means that it's cheaper to make pizzas. Lower costs of production imply that supply curve will shift to the right. We'll be able to provide higher number of units at each and every price. So graphically, it will look like this. This was the original price. Quantity. This was our supply curve. Now, when price of pizza of flour falls, it means that it will be cheaper for us. We'll be able to afford to charge lower prices, regardless of where we've been located originally. Now we'll be able to charge lower prices for our pizzas, and our new supply will now be higher. Our supply curve will shift downwards. Or you can think about this as a movement to the right. We'll be able to sell more units at each and every price, charge low prices or sell higher units. There will be a shift downwards or to the right. New supply curve is now shown by this thick red line. Optional material. The remaining slides are optional, and I recommend that students from economics programs will review this information. It will help them with other more advanced modules which they are going to study later, supply functions, how they're shown mathematically, how they can be derived. And for the rest of you who are not doing economics, you need to finish this reading. So just a few pages from chapter 2 in Sloman, and if you want a few more pages which are optional. That's it for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Bye-bye.